Okay, let's get started. Welcome to Directors Dialogue, our virtual conversation with visionary leaders of science, healthcare, education, and biotech. These dialogues offer an inside perspective on the emerging opportunities, challenges, and trends in biomedical science and biotechnology. Our guests share their most meaningful experiences and observations, tell us what excites and concerns them about the present and future of bioscience, and describe innovations that could dramatically affect the future of human health. You can participate as well by submitting questions through the question and answer box at the bottom of the screen. Send your question at any time during the discussion and we'll answer as many as possible at the end. Tonight, we are discussing pediatric care, research on diseases affecting children, and the challenge of leading the world's best children's hospital. I'm so excited that my guest tonight is Kevin Churchwell, President and Chief Executive Officer of Boston's Children's Hospital. Kevin earned an undergraduate degree here at MIT and a medical degree at Vanderbilt Medical School in Nashville. Then he completed both pediatric residency and clinical fellowship in anesthesia and pediatric critical care at Boston's Children's Hospital. He joined the Vanderbilt faculty in 1995, served as CEO of Children's Hospital at Vanderbilt from 2007 to 2010, and became CEO of Nemore Alfred DuPont Hospital for Children in Wilmington, Delaware. He returned to Boston Children's Hospital in 2013 as Executive Vice President of Health Affairs and Chief Operating Officer. Subsequently, he was named President, and this March, he succeeded Sandy Van Wyk as CEO of Boston Children's. Kevin also serves on the Harvard Medical School faculty as Robert and Dana Smith Associate Professor of Anesthesia and as an Associate Professor of Pediatric Anesthesia. And I'm pleased to note Kevin joined the Whitehead Institute Board of Directors this past June. Thank you, Kevin. Kevin, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here, Ruth. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
It's wonderful. Let me jump in. What do you feel are the most significant opportunities and challenges for improving children's health?
Oh, that's a small question to start. Opportunities to improve children's health. Well, you know, I think that that's an answer that has many opportunities for us to talk about. It's a continuum when I think about children's health or child's health. At one spectrum are the diseases that affect our children that we don't have answers for. We have treatments. We have what we are doing every day to take care of our children with those diseases, whether it's asthma or diabetes, pediatric cancer, metabolic diseases, these diseases that affect particular populations, populations of color, sickle cell is an example, thalassemia. And the opportunity is we're at the cusp, as you know, of really getting answers to those issues, to those diagnoses that can really move forward the care of those children. And I think that that's one of the areas that truly faces us, right, in terms of where the opportunity is and where we see that at Boston Children's Hospital. The other spectrum, of course, are the opportunities looking at in children's health is that from a broader view of what happens to a child as they grow and what are the issues that they have to deal with. And those issues really go to the social determinants, the issues of poverty, the issue of socioeconomic class, and how do we address those? And how do they affect a child's health? Those are and when I look at the spectrum, those are the opportunities that we have at Boston Children's to address those and to find answers as we move forward. And so that's how I think about the opportunities as we move forward.
So are there specific aspects that you would say are specifically like Boston and Massachusetts that the hospital addresses or that you are concerned?
we're just in an
All of the
incredible,
above, but
right. We're just in an incredible environment here, environment where we have the Whitehead, we have the Broad, we have Harvard, the medical school, and we have all of the Harvard affiliated hospitals. We have Boston Children's. I like to call our square block to being a square block where there's Boston Children's, there's the Dana-Farber, there's the Brigham and Women's, there's the BI. That's a pretty impressive square block of clinical care and research that is going on. And so it's a great opportunity for us. As you may know, at Boston Children's, we are the leading pediatric institute for research in the country. And when all is said and done, and we look at hospitals across the country, we still are in the top 5 in terms of what we do, over 450 million in terms of the dollars that are available. And that's work that happens in 2 to 3 buildings of research, where we start from a basic science standpoint, from translational to clinical research. And the opportunity that we have here, especially with our patients, is to create that continuum of investigation. I think our physician scientists, our scientists really feel that being close to the hospital, having that direct connection is vitally important in terms of what they're looking at, what the opportunities are, what they're investigating, and how that can translate into care. And I think that's been consistent we're now over 150 years old, over the 150 years that Boston Children's has been around, that we have seen that be vitally important in those opportunities. One of the key ones that I would bring up is the key around cellular therapies, in that is just exploding, the opportunities around gene therapy and stem cell therapy, especially in pediatrics. And we have an opportunity at Boston Children's, working across the spectrum to have a huge impact in terms of the discovery, translating that to drug therapies, translating that to innovative therapies for our patients with a host of diseases, whether it's sickle cell, whether it's pediatric cancer. And we're thinking through, how do we actually maximize that for our physician scientists, for our clinicians, and for our patients? And I see that over the next 5 to 10 years being an incredible opportunity. The other part is that opportunity I talked about in terms of looking at child's health broadly. And that in Boston and Massachusetts, working with the state, working with other like institutions, the opportunity to do true investigation, to understand what is causing what we're seeing. One example is infant mortality. We haven't solved that, Ruth. It's still a huge issue, and it is an issue that for us is in our neighborhood. In terms of the significant rise in infant mortality and its impact on that environment. How do we actually get our handle on that? It's not just working on one aspect. It's looking at the social determinants, but also looking at genomics, also looking at the maternal influence, also in looking at all aspects for us to really get at the answer of what's happening and what we can do in terms of investigation and treatment to really make a difference. So I think that milieu that we have here, working with our colleagues across all these different institutions, is a great opportunity moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, you alluded to the relationship between fundamental biomedical research and clinical care is really changing because it's much more direct, it seems, right? It's much shorter in a way, but how do we deal with the costs, right? When you mentioned sickle cell anemia, right? And
right.
So how can you envision that we could bring this kind of, so now we can do so much because the basic science and is really providing the know-how with stem cell therapy, for example, as you mentioned, but then that's so costly, right? And then at the other end, you're talking about maternal care and infant.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so how do you connect that? And as a prime research and hospitals, this must be like on the top of your mind.
It's always on our mind, right? And it's truly a combination of how do we find the funding for our investigators. It goes to, of course, the federal dollars that are vitally important for our basic scientists and our translational scientists. And it goes to philanthropy. As you know, I'm sure you're on the road a lot, Ruth, from that standpoint, finding those individuals, those groups that have the interest and have the ability to support the work that our investigators are doing. And I'll be honest with you, we take a portion of our margin. Our clinical margin is invested in this piece of work because of its vital importance, and that's part of our mission. That's what we believe in. We describe at Boston Children's that we have 4 pillars. Our pillars are research, pediatric research. Our pillars are clinical care and clinical innovation. The pillar of education. We work to try and move forward the next generation of leaders in pediatrics and community. And those pillars aren't separate, to be honest with you. They're integrated in this piece of work because the continuum of what we see and what we believe in, that continuum of basic science, observations, and development, and how that can be translated to the bedside in terms of care, and then those observations coming back to the lab for more work, more opportunity, is something we believe in strongly, and I believe has moved our discipline, the discipline of pediatrics, forward.
So children are not little adults, and so is there enough being done actually in biomedical research to specifically target the development and health of children? I mean, I'm actually supported by NICHD. So this is the National Institute of Child Health. But I'm always amazed of how small actually their budget is.
Yes, and the question is why?
Yes, I'm asking you.
No, my view is that what we're doing is shortchanging our future.
Yeah.
And why do we do that? Well, I've always had the view that adults make the decision. If we had kids making the decision, then we have a bigger budget. But with adults making the decision, they concentrate, of course, on adult issues, adult disease, and et cetera. And so it's the work. It's the work to translate and present why it's important to do the work, the biomedical research, the work in children. Because without that, we're shortchanging our future. And the opportunity is to how do we develop our future? How do we truly develop our future? And that is investing in our children, investing in the care, investing in the research for that next generation. It's a continued conversation. I ask anyone that's on this webinar to be part of helping us translate what we do and support what we do so that we get more dollars to help what we do move forward.
Maybe you could give some specific examples where there are approaches where therapeutic approaches have come directly from biomedical research, but really directly to help children. So some examples, I kind of like SMA, or also the
yes.
Maybe you could go into some of those, also some of the rare diseases that are obviously very important often to diagnose in children. So what are the real science opportunities?
Well, I think you're describing some really important ones that will continue to move us forward. Spinal muscular atrophy, SMA, is a disease that affects children very early on. There are different types, but the most severe type is diagnosed at birth. It can be diagnosed prior to birth now, which is very important.
Huh. Oh.
You probably don't know this, Ruth, but I practiced, and my practice was pediatric critical care.
Uh-huh.
And so when I practiced, and this is more than 20, 25 years ago, the children with this disease had a death sentence. Okay, so they would come to our intensive care units, and we could only tell the family, this is what is going to happen. Your child is going to lose function. It's going to stop breathing, and I'm sorry. Eventually, we did more intervention with tracheostomies and wheelchairs and et cetera, which prolong life, but didn't create a quality of life or et cetera. And so the intervention that has occurred in terms of a true therapy that intervenes and that is infused into the spinal fluid. And we found that the earlier you do it, the more opportunity the child has totally changed the picture. Children that had a death sentence now are walking, are incredibly functional. And this has opened up a whole vista of opportunity in terms of what these therapies can do. I don't know if you've heard of what the work around these N-of-1 therapies, looking at the same type of intervention that is utilized in SMA, looking at different neuromuscular or neurodevelopmental diseases that are, when we call them N-of-1, they affect very small number of children. I'm never sure it's an N-of-1, to be honest with you, but it's small enough that there's not a group or a study or a section that is going to really develop dollars and give dollars for this. And so we are developing, there is a whole discipline now being developed around utilizing these antisense compounds that are being looked at to intervene with these types of diseases. I think that's going to take time to really figure out what the opportunity is, and are they going to be truly therapeutic? But it's a great opportunity from that standpoint. Another example you talked about was sickle cell. Sickle cell disease is an incredibly traumatic, terrible disease. It affects African Americans, and those that have it have a lifespan of 40s. They die in their 40s, and they die suffering. They die in pain. They die in disability due to the sickling of their red cells, which cause what we call these vaso-occlusive crises, occlusion of their vasculature, which results in pain in the limbs, which results in lung disease, which results in strokes. And our therapies have been just in some respects rudimentary for a long time. Transfusion therapy. We found out the more you transfuse a patient to get them at a certain number, that they can do better. It's not a cure in any way, shape, or fashion. But gene therapy, what our folks are doing, led by Dave Williams, who actually I think did some of his work at the Whitehead, Ruth.
There you go.
There's always that connection, right? In terms of his initial work, is revolutionary, in that identifying the gene that regulates fetal hemoglobin. We know that fetal hemoglobin, the more fetal hemoglobin you have, the more you have an opportunity to better oxygenate your blood and et cetera. And this gene actually regulates that. And Dave's group has been able to create an environment where an insertion of the gene regulates that, creating more fetal hemoglobin or turning it off and regulating it. Well, what does that really mean? Well, we've gotten to the point of a clinical trial. And I think we're upwards of 7 to 10 patients, or at least 7 patients in the trial. So one of the patients had profound sickle cell, the whole spectrum, pain crisis, disability, and et cetera, undergoes gene therapy. Ruth, he doesn't have sickle cell disease. He's normal now. He's thinking about getting a job. He's thinking about exercise. He's thinking about normal things. And that's the opportunity. Now, the cost is significant. You're exactly right. But that's the next piece of work. that needs to be supported. How do we create an environment where this can be much more generalized and reduce the costs? What are the key insights, the key development that needs to happen in the lab that can be translated from translational standpoint to the bedside, for us to take what's happening now and make it much more broad-based in terms of this disease. It will happen. The question is how soon? And that's based upon, in some respects, the dollars that will be provided in terms of our investigators to really do that piece of work. But we're at the cusp of that type of opportunity, whether it's sickle cell or thalassemia, or many of the blood dyscrasias from that standpoint. And so when I come to work every day, that's what really energizes me, because, you know, I can't do that work, but I can certainly support it. I can certainly work to find the space and the environment for for our physician scientists, for our scientists that are doing this incredible work, that gets to the bedside and is making a true difference for our kids.
But it's interesting because the examples you're talking about and the cost is usually because the scientists have figured out a way, I mean, in these examples that you showed us, but then now what you need to do is to streamline that, you know, develop, you know, where, you know, using the principles, but now making this so that it is accessible for many more people. It comes down to a cost. So who should do that work?
Who should do that work? Everyone should do that work. But who's actually doing it?
No, but it's work? Really, you know, it's kind of not the sort
right.
of, I feel like, you know, there's sort of like, yeah, you realize we can do this. So for example, we can do the switch with the hemoglobin switch, right? But now yes. The next step is not just that we can do it and it works, but how can we do it much more efficiently?
Much more efficiently.
And that is where, you know, normally you would say, oh, this is when we look for the pharmaceutical companies. And so how supportive are they about child?
Well, you know, that's a tough
and
question.
These are rare diseases, right?
Right. You know, you have those companies, there's an industry of looking at rare diseases that certainly has supported this work. They're sitting right next to you in Cambridge, many of them from that standpoint. And then there's philanthropy. There are those groups that have that interest, that have those dollars. The Gates Foundation is one example of this, in Ruth, in sickle cell, and that identifying how do we actually, to your point, how can we spread this? How can we make it streamlined and efficient and create from a cost standpoint that can actually support an entire continent of Africa? And that's what the Gates Foundation is asking. And is supporting our researchers in doing that piece of work. The dollars it takes to do that are more than we currently have, of course. But I think that combination of federal dollars, of philanthropy, of industry, working on that common mission is the opportunity. I think we're sort of at a point where we've crossed the Rubicon. We will get there. And the question is, how soon, how fast, you know, what is going to be the investment that is going to take to truly make the difference? I think that's where we're headed from that standpoint.
So are there complete research areas in children's health that you feel are really underexplored by basic scientists? So for young scientists, would you say there are certain areas which really should get much more attention from the basic science?
Well, I don't know if we need more attention, but there are great opportunities behavioral health is one huge one, Ruth, in that the behavioral and mental health issues that we're seeing in our kids today are issues that we just don't have answers for. It's almost like we're not back to the Stone Age, but we're back to an age where we're using a hammer and a nail to fix a problem that needs a much more delicate solution. Interventions, drug therapies, ability to really truly understand what's happening from a genomic standpoint, from a behavioral standpoint, and those interactions. COVID has been a true millennium pandemic, especially in our adult healthcare institutions. In pediatrics, we have not seen a significant number of children with COVID, infected with COVID, critically ill enough to be admitted to the hospital and taken care of. Small numbers, especially in the Northeast. What we have seen is an explosion of kids with behavioral and mental health issues that continue to come to us every day. And we don't know why. We don't know why this is happening. And so it's a huge opportunity to explore. And then there are the basic, and so that's an area. The neuroscience in general is an area that is just truly at the cusp of being investigated, whether it's epilepsy and the genomics around that, or what is the substrate that is causing that? Why do cells act the way they act? Brain cells, neurons, and et cetera, that cause our children at a very early age to go where they go in terms of epilepsy. So the neuroscience is another major area. There's been, of course, dollars in terms of pediatric cancer, but I think that there is still much work that needs to happen. When I started as a resident, the survival was in the 60%, 70% range for leukemia. It's now past 90%, and we should celebrate that. But the way we get to that 90% is pretty tough, using very toxic agents to kill leukemic cells. What that translates to are long-term issues that affect our children across the board, whether in CNS issues, pulmonary issues, heart issues, that cut short their life. So how do we change that paradigm in terms of what's going to change that paradigm in terms of the care that we can provide and the treatments that we can provide? What are the investigations that need to happen, and how do we support that? I think it's a great field. It's an important field for our young investigators to get into. It's another great opportunity.
So is immune therapy just as common actually in children?
Yeah, and so it's starting, it's there. And I think in the next 5 to 10 years, it's just going to explode from that standpoint as more and more understanding of how it can be utilized is going to be one of the areas that I think will be incredibly important for the care in our children with pediatric cancer. One area that we fix mechanically now, okay, and we've gotten pretty good at it, is our children with congenital heart disease. Right, our kids, something happens, and we are understanding it more. We need to about what happens in utero that makes going from a normal heart to a heart that is very abnormal. That goes from a heart that has 2 ventricles to 1 ventricle, or an abnormal valve, or how does this disrotation occur? Well, there's work that needs to happen for us to truly understand that, because that's where the interventions can occur. It can occur if we can figure it out in terms of gene therapy that really intervenes there, so we don't have to have what we do today in terms of these incredibly skilled surgeons and cardiologists that operate on hearts the size of walnuts. That has changed that and total field, but it's just out there waiting for more work, more investigation, more discovery for us to truly understand where we can head in the care of our kids with congenital heart disease. So it's all over the place in terms of neuromuscular issues, and so I invite everyone who that has an interest to take this on to help us move forward.
Maybe we go even one step further. We're already in utero. What about reproductive biology? in general.
Or that's another frontier. And I think that's one that we are just starting to dip our toe in the water in terms of that piece of work. But that's working with our adult colleagues to try to get the better understanding of what those mechanisms are, and be able to figure that out. I think is a 20-year, 30-year experiment moving forward.
So is that really separated from pediatrics, right? Is that a problem?
It's always been a problem in that we continue to work on breaking down our silos.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right. And the more that we're able to break down those silos, the more we can rapidly move the discipline forward. But that's an issue. How do we work with our adult colleagues in maternal and fetal health and reproductive health is really thinking through what is the continuum, what is the continuum opportunity, and how what we bring to the table. Those discussions are ongoing at Boston Children's, actually, in terms of
how do you train people to break down, right? Isn't it where the education pillar becomes very important to break down silos?
Well, I think the next generation of researchers and scientists are going to lead us in that direction, because they're much more about collaboration. They see it, and they see the opportunity. I think we need to enable them from that standpoint. The rewards have previously been rewards that actually supported silos, supported not sharing information. I think those are changing. I think that's great. It's another great opportunity for us.
But then you have to figure out how to promote the individual, right? I mean, this is always like even our academic system is sort of all prepared for the individual versus the collaborator.
Versus the collaborator. And so I'm going to leave that to you to help us figure out.
Let's change direction a little bit. I would like, I would actually like to come back to community. So, I would really like to know what measures the Children's Hospital is really taking to promote research and care that includes the complete spectrum of diversity of our community. And you mentioned that a little bit, but
yeah,
there's very different needs, very different problems.
Well, that's an important piece of work. I will tell you that it's an important piece of work that has not had enough concentration and enough support. I do believe that's changing. It's changing at Boston Children's. What we have gone through over the last 20 months with COVID, but also with the social unrest and the social issues that have come to the forefront with George Floyd's death and Breonna Taylor have really caused us to really start asking some important questions. What are we doing in that regard? Are we doing enough? And what can we do? And in that, we have brought those questions to the forefront at Boston Children's. We have created it. It's not a conversation we have at the end of the hour. Ruth, I used to say that the biggest problem that we have when we talk about those issues of inequity, of diversity, is that everyone thinks it's interesting, but we always talk about them at the end of the hour of an hour meeting. So they get the last 3 minutes, right? They get the last 3 minutes. And so what do you do in the last 3 minutes? You can't do a lot in the last 3 minutes. So what we need to do is start our meetings with this discussion.
We have some time. Tell me more.
And so that's what we've done. We start our meetings with that discussion. We have made it part of our enterprise goals, our enterprise, what we view as important. And so we do it internally. We've done it in terms of how we are responding to our patients and families at Boston Children's from a diversity inclusivity standpoint. Who are we recruiting and who are we developing? From a clinician standpoint, from an administrative standpoint, from a research standpoint. We've worked with Harvard Medical School to actively research individuals of diversity in terms of with cluster hiring in terms of our labs. And we've been incredibly successful over the past year to 2 years. The point I've tried to make is that if you stop now, that's it. You have to continue to say, this is something that we're going to talk about, and say it's important 5 years from now, that we're still doing this work. And it's part of the culture that we do. And it's part of the research that we do. We have a wonderful researcher, Dr. Philippa Tonko, who does work in immunology, allergy, asthma, who's done some wonderful work with asthma, NIH funded, that's looked at communities of color, why there are increases in asthma in those communities. And working with others, they've identified genetic links in those communities. And with that, have identified drugs that affect those genes. And so now have gone to a clinical trial of the particular drug to see if they can really affect the asthma incidence in our communities. And that's happening at Boston Children's. And that's just one example of the opportunity that we have. You asked about another area of investigation for our young researchers. That's absolutely another area ripe for our young investigators to really truly make a difference.
And that's also a real, in a way, a real children's disease, right? Because it really starts so early.
Asthma starts early, and it's one that it's the leading cause of kids coming to our emergency departments across the country. Mm-hmm. And we continue to find more drug therapies and et cetera, but we're still, I call it, we're still working at the back end mm-hmm. of therapy. And how do we get to the front end? How do we identify and do interventions that truly stop the disease before it starts and mitigates it very early on? Diabetes is another one, Ruth, in terms of type 1 diabetes that starts early. And the investigation continues in terms of understanding it. And I know the work that's happening at Whitehead is vital from that standpoint, in terms of the lab that's doing that work, for us to understand that mechanism. But that's another great example of the opportunities that are there.
Yeah, but I mean, there probably stem cell research is really going to help, or generating those cells, generating the better cells,
Looking forward to that.
Now, somewhat different, but I would like to kind of, you are such an amazing leader. You have led 3 different institutions. And so I want to first sort of ask you, what do you think works best to lead and move organizations ahead? Because that's obviously what you have done and are doing.
That's a great question. I think that my experience tells me that the first thing is to understand the organization you are leading, or understanding its strengths, understanding its weaknesses, and then understanding and what is the direction that you believe the organization should go. And then how do you motivate people to go in that direction? And you motivate them by understanding what they want to do and aligning that to the institutional's opportunity. And the next is something that I think is really important, is that you don't talk a lot. You do a lot more listening than talking. And how do we as leaders become active listeners is a piece of work that I continue to work on, because I think that is a major driver of good decisions and good direction in terms of leading an organization. And this is something that I had to work personally on, right? Because very early on, I was a talker. I was, I had to get my ideas out. Gosh, these are my ideas. This is what we ought to do. Gosh, and realized that I wasn't getting the most out of everyone, and wasn't getting the most out of the organization by doing all the talking as opposed to listening. So I think those are the key things that I try to utilize. And and put forward in moving forward organizations.
Yeah, I think that's really good insight and advice. More directly, for the Whitehead, earlier this year, you made the affirmative and wonderful decision to join our board. And I'm wondering, what do you find most exciting about the work we're doing, and how can Whitehead, which focuses really on curiosity-driven science and actually very much investigator-initiated science, make a significant contribution in biomedical science in coming years? So sort of like combining both our selfish interests.
Yes. I think that it's very exciting to be on the board. It's an incredible honor. Part of my history, as you mentioned, is that I actually attended MIT late 70s, early 80s. And so I'm sure many on the webinar remember Kendall Square at that time. It was a vast wasteland. That's what. And then the Whitehead was being built as I was leaving, which was just this new innovative opportunity. And it changed the landscape. It changed the landscape of biomedical research and its connection to the Institute, the connection to other institutions, and its connection to the hospitals. You got to stay there because you're a pipeline for us. Pipeline of great individuals who have that curiosity gene. And so I think my goal is to help the Whitehead stay curious, to create an environment where it's okay to be curious. It's okay to continue to investigate, because out of that, you just never know. You never know. But with that are these great opportunities that you have seen, and that we have seen time and time again, translated to the bedside, translated to care, translated to making a difference in patients' lives, in our children's lives. And so that's why I'm excited about being part of the Whitehead, the board, and helping you and helping those that are part of the Whitehead.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And maybe we should get some questions from the audience. Aaron, if you can. Here we go. Here are the questions. Does Boston Children's Hospital coordinate research and trials with other children's hospitals in the US and internationally? Any examples of success and challenges yet to overcome? Great question.
Significant challenges. The answer to that question is yes. It's the challenges around data, sharing of data, the challenges around IRBs, and that the creation of centralized IRBs are going to be incredibly important, because otherwise, whatever trial you're doing, whatever the protocol is, has to be approved by each of the different institutions. So that's time, and there's change. And
how is that being addressed? How is that being? That's a real problem.
Right, by the work of centralizing the IRB process, by everyone accepting, we can have one IRB process that is accepted by each of the institutions.
And international, or at the moment?
Oh gosh, we're just doing national first. International, but the international is also the opportunity. And how do we? And then there's sharing of data. What are the data sets, and how do we create that shared data opportunity? One of our investigators, Ken Mandel, is in our research IT chip program. We call it the chip program in terms of informatics. And he's done some great work in bringing together different institutions, different children's hospitals around a common set of agreements about how we share data, what we're going to investigate, and how we move that forward. And so we're working with Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, Cincinnati Children's Hospital, some of the major children's hospitals in this country, bringing them together to first identify how we're going to work together, and then identifying the opportunities that are there in terms of clinical trials. That'll happen. I think that'll happen in terms of ultimately the sickle cell trial. I think Ruth will be an example of that. And then there'll be international studies. And so Dave Williams has done work to bring an international consortium together. But that's early on. This is pre-COVID. The work was happening at a rapid pace. It slowed down with COVID, but I think it will pick up as we move forward from that standpoint.
Did anything change during COVID? You said, I mean, there are fewer children, but then it became very important also with vaccination and everything. So did these collaborations, were there some of the red tape, was that cut during that time?
I can't say the red tape was cut, but the collaborations were extremely helpful. On one particular area, it was that, as I mentioned, we have not seen a lot of kids with primary COVID infected, causing pulmonary disease and et cetera. What we have seen is a multi-inflammatory system presentation that happens about 2 weeks after the initial primary COVID infection in kids. The presentation is an inflammatory one, affects vasculature, the heart, and other vasculature in the body, much like Kawasaki's disease that we see. And with that type of consortium, that type of group, we were able to really collect the patients, create that to really do the trial to identify what is the best treatment for these kids. A combination of gamma globulin steroids, very much how we treat kids with Kawasaki's, but an aggressive plan of action has really made a huge difference in that patient population. That's one really large example that occurred with COVID.
So we have actually one related question with COVID. Could you address the reaction to the pediatric COVID vaccine among patients, children at the hospital? Yeah.
That's a great question. So we've always had a population that has been very resistant to vaccination. That's been the case. The mumps, measles, the regular vaccinations, the hip vaccination, polio, and et cetera. And we've always worked with those groups. This is a little different. Somehow this has become, some respects, political, when it's not political at all. It is a vaccine that is incredibly important. And we have stressed the importance of this vaccine for our kids. You know, we just last week it was approved for 5 to 11 in terms of the Pfizer. And we are available and helping groups, helping primary care practices really get our kids vaccinated. Well, what is that? How is that helpful? Well, it's helpful. We know that our kids have done relatively well being infected with COVID. And that's been a saving grace. We also know, Ruth, that as this virus changes, it has changed in terms of how it's presented and how it's affected kids. As I mentioned, in the Northeast, we certainly have been still protected. And I think we're at protection because of vaccination in adults, because of masking, because of social distancing, and really the discipline that we've had. In other parts of the country, especially the South, boy, it really affected adults, but then started affecting kids, especially kids with chronic illness. So we've had close to 200 children die in this country with COVID. And that shouldn't have been the case. And the more we are able to really get our kids vaccinated and protected, that's a clear path to protect our kids. It's also a clear path to get our kids, and I can't say we're going to get back to our normal life anytime really soon. But a normalization of their life is vitally important. Going back to school, being able to participate in activities. We know that's part of what has occurred in terms of the explosion in behavioral and mental health issues in our kids. The lack of having that opportunity. And so getting our kids in a normal environment, I think, is vitally important. And the vaccine is going to help us get there.
Yeah, there's a question not directly related, but in a way with other illnesses. Could you talk more about the latest advances in treatment of cancer and cystic fibrosis?
Well, there's a revolution in cystic fibrosis. There's been a revolution with our company with Vertex in this city in terms of what they've identified and the drug therapies that are changing the landscape. In that there's been a great deal of work at cystic fibrosis over the years, especially at Boston Children's. The life expectancy when I started was in the mid-20s, and now is in the mid-40s to 60s. And now it's not just that the life expectancy is there, it's that their life, in terms of the normalization of their life, has changed with the drug therapies that have been put in place. There are more coming down the pike, identifying the different genes that have been altered, and how can we affect those in terms of cellular transport, sodium and potassium transport. And so stay tuned for that in terms of that piece of work. You know, there's a story, and many of you may have heard the story, in that the company that produced these drugs knew it was working. So Ruth, they knew they had something. And part of how they knew they had it was that an individual in one of their clinical trials ran the Boston Marathon, was able to run the Boston Marathon, and they tracked her through the Boston Marathon. And this is 2 years before they, presented the drug for use and et cetera. So they knew they had something there. That's pretty exciting. Pediatric cancer, the immunotherapies are changing the landscape. There's changes, there's opportunities in cancers that we just didn't have a therapy for. Brain cancer being one example. Incredibly difficult cancer to treat. What the research that's happening now in terms of the interventions and the understanding that's happening now is changing that landscape as we move forward.
So coming back in terms of the last question, in terms of the next generation. So how do you at Boston Children's Hospital support physician scientists to manage their time between research and seeing patients? That's obviously the people that, we train them, but then how much science can they, so how do you make sure that balance?
Well, it's a challenge. And the key part is that we support the challenge. We support the opportunity. We support it with dollars. We support it with space. We support it with recruitment. And we support our leaders to help develop the environment for our investigators. And so that work is celebrated at Boston Children's. That work is encouraged. Those individuals are celebrated and encouraged and supported in their development. And to me, that's one of the key aspects. What you concentrate on, you will be successful in. And we concentrate on those individuals and in supporting them. It's difficult, there's no doubt about it. But these are special individuals. These individuals that see the future. They see themselves as being part of that continuum. And the key part is, Ruth, they want to be part of that continuum. Mm-hmm. They see the importance of taking care of patients. They see the importance of their observations in the care of their patients and what they take back to the lab. And our goal is to make sure that they're here, they're supported, and they're developed. The hardest part for us is to keep them. Because everybody wants them. But that's how we think about it. I just had a great conversation with our chair of pediatrics, Dr. Gary Fletcher, who's just done incredible work in this regard, in the development of our clinical basic science, translational science enterprise. and the support that he's provided to the faculty, to the young investigators. And the key part is that our discussion was about that. Our discussion was, how can we continue to help and provide that support? And that's I think that's the main thing that may make us a little different from the average pediatric hospital.
Mhm. Yeah, that's it's a great goal. Thank you so much, Karen. It's just really great. Thanks for joining me tonight. And this was definitely a memorable addition to the Director's Dialogue series. And I so much enjoyed the conversation. And thanks everyone out there for joining us. And I hope you'll be with us in January when my guest will be Jill Shah, president of the Shah Family Foundation. Jill will speak with us about ways of driving long-term transformative community changes in partnership with local organizations and local, state, and federal governments. And in a way, carrying on this idea of how to take care of the children from a different perspective. And that event will take place on Tuesday, January 18th at 7 p.m. You know, the Whitehead Institute is an extraordinary place, and I hope that you will take some time to learn a bit more about the work we're doing and the discoveries made at the Institute. Please go to our website, wi.mit.edu, to learn more about our research. There you can sign up for Pulse, our monthly newsletter, and if you choose, make a gift to support our crucial work. Until next time, please stay safe and be well. And thank you all for joining. In particular, thank you, Kevin, and see you soon.